The worst part of recovery wasn't the ache in my side, it was a text message that split my heart in half. Just got discharged. Can't walk yet. Can you pick me up when you have time? I had sent it to my son Michael, while the nurse wheeled me toward the sliding glass doors of Phoenix General Hospital. The reply came back within minutes, but not from him. It was from my daughter Law. We can't keep dropping everything for you every time. Just call an Uber. I stared at those words as the Arizona heat pressed against the windows, as my chest tightened and as something deep inside me shifted. Fine. I thought. I would call a ride. But the man who arrived at the curb that afternoon would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my past, and my future. 3 days earlier, I had been rushed to the emergency room with a gallbladder that felt like it had turned into a blowtorch under my ribs. The surgeon said the operation was routine, but the recovery would be slow. At 65, I had already grown used to disappointment from the people closest to me, but in that hospital bed, I still expected my son to show up. I waited through 3 endless days of bad television and worse food, convincing myself that Michael was too busy with his insurance business, that Sarah was too overwhelmed with the children. After all, Sarah's voice had been full of concern when I first called about the pain. "Oh my goodness. You need to get to the hospital right away," she had said. "Michael and I will meet you there." But they never did, and when I asked for nothing more than a ride home, they sent me a text that pushed me out of the fog of excuses I had been making for them for years. I chose a cab instead of using an app. It felt sturdier, less likely to abandon me if the ride took too long. But when I was wheeled to the curb, the man who stepped into my shadow was not a driver. He was dressed neatly, perhaps a little too neatly for the Arizona sun, and he spoke my name in a tone that was professional, yet oddly familiar. "Mrs. Dorothy Parker," he asked. "Robert Hamilton. I'm with Regional Southwest Financial. Could we talk?" It should have startled me, but instead a strange calm settled over me. Maybe from the medication. Maybe from exhaustion. He offered his hand steady and respectful, and helped me into a modest Toyota. "If this is about Michael's mortgage," I murmured, "I'm not in a position to help right now." His eyes flickered with surprise. "Actually, it's the opposite." As he drove us away from the hospital, careful through the glare of the afternoon traffic, he explained. Over the past months, Michael had been telling the bank that he was struggling under the weight of supporting his elderly mother's medical expenses. He had applied for a loan modification, submitting documents that claimed I was a financial burden, nearly incapacitated and in need of constant care. My stomach dropped. "That's completely untrue," I whispered. Robert nodded. "I know. I've seen the statements. What he submitted were your own payments to him labeled as expenses he was supposedly covering for you. He's been using your generosity as proof of his hardship while defaulting on the loan you unknowingly co-signed." The word lodged like a thorn. Co-signed. My mind flashed back to the day Michael had brought me into the bank, papers in hand. His smile bright with gratitude. He had told me it was just a character reference, a way to vouch for him. Proud to be helpful, I signed without question. Now Robert's voice was steady, almost sorrowful. "You signed as a co-borrower. The balance is $344,000 plus late fees. If he defaults, you are equally responsible." The air seemed to tilt. "Why are you telling me this here like this?" I asked, my voice barely holding. His grip on the wheel tightened. "Because cases involving elder abuse deserve more than paperwork. And because..." He paused, his eyes searching mine. "Something about your name felt familiar. What was your maiden name?" My answer slipped out without thought. "Sullivan, Dorothy Sullivan." His face went pale, the color draining, as if he had seen a ghost. His hands trembled against the steering wheel. "Bobby." The name escaped me before I realized. He closed his eyes, his voice breaking. "Hello. In an instant, 45 years unraveled between us. The summer of 1980 flooded back lakewater on our feet. Promises whispered on station platforms. Plans to leave Ohio behind and make a life of our own. He had been the boy I was supposed to meet at Union Station. The one I was supposed to run away with. My parents had told me he left for San Francisco. His father, he explained now, had been told by mine that I had married someone else, that I was pregnant, that he should let me go. Lies woven by two families who had decided our future for us. Tears came, hard and fast grief that had waited decades to be released. When our voices steadied again, Robert turned the conversation back to the present. Michael had not only lied, he had submitted falsified medical records claiming I suffered from dementia and required full-time care. He had turned every dollar I sent into evidence of my supposed incompetence. The betrayal was bone deep. But something else stirred alongside the pain. Strength. A steel I hadn't felt in years. I met Robert's gaze and asked the only question that mattered. What happens now? His answer was simple. We give him exactly what he asked for. A visit from his incompetent mother in my office with every document on the table. The next morning, I stood behind the glass wall of a bank conference room, watching my son perform his polished routine. Michael gestured at chart, spoke with confident authority, and described my supposed decline in clinical detail. 26 minutes of lies. Robert murmured it like a timekeeper. And I realized he had seen men like my son before, but this time I would not sit quietly. When Robert opened the door, I walked in and met my son's eyes. His papers fluttered to the ground, his face blanching. Mom, what are you doing here? I pulled out a chair, my hand steady. Please continue, I said softly. I was just hearing about my dementia. Michael's mouth worked as if searching for a path back to control. But his eyes were a boy's, cornered, frightened, calculating. He reached for my hand. I folded mine in my lap. Robert set a folder between us and spoke in a voice as calm as a ruler. He laid out the application Michael had filed, the care payments labeled to look like transfers to an assisted living facility, the supposed hospitalizations that I had not had, the affidavits claiming progressive cognitive decline. He did not hurry, and that was worse than anger. With every page he turned, I watched the illusion my son lived inside lose its seams. Mom, please, Michael said, pitching his voice toward sincerity. I was protecting you. These are just technicalities to buy time. The bank wants boxes checked. He gestured at the papers and tried to smile. I knew you'd be upset if you heard the word default. I wanted to fix it first. By declaring me incompetent, I said. The question landed like a dropped plate. It sounded almost academic, but the echo of it shook the room. Robert's gaze flicked between us. Then he added the part Michael was avoiding: 3 months delinquent, a balance of $344,000 penalties, accruing, and most damning, falsified medical claims submitted to a federally insured institution. Words like bank fraud and elder financial abuse entered the air. Cool and clinical, they did not shout. They did not need to dot in the quiet that followed. A carton of my old generosity broke open inside me and spilled out, sticky and tired. I remembered small loans, I called gifts groceries. I called visits and holidays. I called short because a client needed him. I remembered the day at the bank when he'd slid papers toward me and called it a character reference. He had not needed my character, he had needed my signature. What happens if I do nothing? I asked, eyes on Robert, but voice for Michael. If I go home and let the bank machines grind along? Robert answered without drama. The bank would proceed, notices, legal filings, foreclosure proceedings that would sweep both borrowers. Garnishment of assets was possible, including my modest retirement. He paused, letting the picture finish drawing itself. Or he said I could choose to act, assume payments to protect my interests, convert my help into structure, step into the position my name already occupied. Michael leaned forward as if the table were a cliff edge. Mom, you would not. I would, I said. The question is whether I should. I owe you an apology, he began, his voice shaking. What I did was criminal, literally criminal. I told myself I was protecting you from stress, but the truth is, I was protecting myself from failure. I used your love to cover my mistakes. And I can't undo that, but I can try to fix what's left. He pushed the envelope toward me. Inside was a cashier's check for $67,000. I looked up, stunned. Where did you get this? I sold the business, he admitted, his voice breaking. At a loss, but it was enough to repay what you covered. I also started counseling. Apparently financial dishonesty is a compulsion some people live with. I'm one of them. Sarah is furious, as she should be, but we're in counseling too. I'm trying to salvage my marriage, my family, myself, but most of all, I want to salvage us. I want to be the son you deserve. His eyes met mine, brimming with something I hadn't seen in years: accountability. My instinct was to soften, to forgive too quickly, but I held my ground. The rental agreement stands, I said. You will pay rent like anyone else until you prove you can handle responsibility. That's not negotiable. Disappointment flickered across his face, then faded into acceptance. I understand, he said quietly. I softened just enough to let hope breathe. But I am willing to discuss rebuilding our family if you can sustain this honesty. That depends on you. Relief washed over him like a tide dot. Thank you, Mom. I won't waste this chance. He left that night with his head lower than when he arrived. But for the first time, I believed he might actually rise. 6 months later, my kitchen smelled of roasting turkey and cinnamon. The kind of scent that softens even the hardest edges of memory. I stood at the stove in the house that now legally bore my name, preparing Thanksgiving dinner, while laughter floated in from the living room. Emma and Jake, my grandchildren, sprawled on the rug, giggling, as Robert patiently explained the rules of chess to Emma while Jake showed him some game on his tablet. Their laughter was light, unguarded, the sound of children who felt safe. The doorbell rang and I wiped my hands before answering. On the porch stood Michael, holding a bottle of wine in one hand and an envelope in the other. He wore no mask this time, no confident grin, no salesman's posture, just a genuine smile tinged with humility. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom," he said. I hugged him, and for the first time in years, he held on a little longer than politeness required. "This is for you," he said, passing me the envelope. Inside was a purchase agreement, fair market value down payment included. It represented 2 years of rent payments made on time, 2 years of living under a contract that forced him to respect boundaries he once ignored. "I want to earn the house back the right way," Michael said firmly. "I want Emma and Jake to see their father as someone who keeps his word, someone who takes responsibility." I looked past him at Sarah helping the children out of the car. She waved at me, and for the first time in our long, jagged history, the gesture felt genuine. She had changed in those months, less of the carefully crafted tears, more of a steady resolve. Once she stopped shielding Michael, I discovered a woman I could respect. "We'll discuss it after the holidays," I said, linking my arm through my son's. "Robert's been looking forward to meeting you properly." That night, my table was full. My family gathered under my roof in my house by my rules. For years, I had been treated like a wallet, like collateral, like a woman whose only value was financial. Now I was respected, listened to, even celebrated. And at my side stood Robert, no longer the boy I once lost at a train station, but the man fate had returned to me when I least expected it. Later, after the dishes were cleared and the children dozed on the couch, Robert and I stood shoulder to shoulder at the sink rinsing plates. "When I first saw your name on Michael's file," he said, "I never imagined it would lead here. Fate has a sense of humor." I laughed softly, handing him a glass to dry. "And you're still slightly crazy for driving Uber on weekends." He chuckled. "Regional bank managers don't make as much money as people think. And I like meeting people, hearing their stories. That's how I recognized your name in the first place." He set the glass down and turned to me, his expression shifting into something tender and certain. From his pocket, he drew a small velvet box. My heart skipped. "Bobby, I know we're not kids anymore," he said, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "I know we've both lived whole lives since that summer in 1980. But I also know that some things are worth waiting for. Dorothy Sullivan Parker. Will you marry me?" Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the ring. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "I come with complicated family rental properties and a granddaughter who cheats at chess." Robert smiled, radiant and sure. "I come with no family at all, a modest savings account and a tendency to work too much. I think we balance each other out." I laughed through my tears. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." He slipped the ring onto my finger, and in that moment, 45 years elapsed into now. The girl who once waited at Union Station finally received her answer just decades later than expected. As we sat together that evening, Robert spoke of early retirement, of traveling the world, of finally living the dreams we once spun when we were 20. I looked around at the family I had rebuilt, not through enabling or sacrifice, but through boundaries and respect. I looked at the man beside me, the boy I had once lost, now found again, and I realized something deeper than revenge. Revenge had carried me this far, but it was not the ending. The true victory was reclaiming my worth, demanding respect, and embracing love when it finally came back. For years, I had been invisible. Now, I was seen, respected, and cherished. Sometimes, the best revenge is not punishment at all. It is refusing to be diminished, stepping into your own power, and daring to accept happiness when it finally knocks on your door. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched you, please like, share, and subscribe so more people can discover it. And I would love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and tell me your story too. My voice surprised me with how little tremor it carried. I looked at my son until he had to look back. "You have been spending my love like a limitless account. Today you learned the limit." We left him with a copy of everything and the sound of his own heartbeat in his ears. Outside, the desert morning was bright and pitiless. Robert walked me to the elevator with the quiet courtesy a soldier uses to see someone safely through a door. "Phase 2, I asked, keeping my chin up. He nodded. "Consequences that teach." The phone began its drumbeat at 6 a.m. the next day. I let it ring itself hoarse twice before I answered. Sarah's voice arrived, trembling with urgency. Wrapped in the careful concern I had once mistaken for love. There had been a misunderstanding, she said. The banker had confused documentation. They were under extraordinary pressure. I should think of Emma and Jake. I stared at my kettle as it came to a boil, and felt the old hooks in those names loosen one by one. I thought of them yesterday, I said, pouring water over the tea bag. I thought of them when their father told strangers, I cannot think at all. Silence then, a pivot. What are you going to do? She asked, and there it was, the recognition that the board had turned, and it was no longer their move. I will be at the house at 2 p.m., I said. We will discuss options. When I hung up, I texted Robert. His answer came back within a minute, proof that the past had not dulled his speed. Ready when you are. Bring your spine and your coffee. By early afternoon, my living room table had become a small war desk. Robert had prepared notes of primer on co-borrower rights, a simple outline of what the bank would accept if we sought a non-criminal resolution, and a draft rental agreement tabbed in neat colors. It was audacious, he warned, but it gave dignity a form you could sign. I slipped papers into my purse and felt for the first time in 2 years like the adult in my own life. At 2 p.m., exactly, Sarah opened the door of the house. My name had helped by. Her eyes were red-rimmed, a tissue wilted in her hand. Behind her, the foyer gleamed with marble I had not chosen. Michael looked up from a laptop at the kitchen table, the screen crowded with tabs I did not need to read to recognize criminal defense attorneys, loan modification statutes, perhaps even the penalties for false statements. He closed the computer and tried to square his shoulders into authority he no longer possessed. We can fix this, he started. We need to work together. That banker has a name, I said lightly, and the bank has my signature. I placed my purse on the table and sat. Let's be precise. I could see the moment Sarah realized I was not here to be managed. She folded into the chair opposite me, hands clasped in a model of careful sympathy. We're family. That word, I said softly, means different things depending on who is speaking. Robert's plan was simple, and sharp as a surgeon's instrument. I explained it without apology. As co-borrower, I would assume payments immediately to prevent foreclosure and protect my credit. I would pay the arrears, the penalties, and the costs tied to the bank's investigation, a sum that came to $67,000. In exchange, Michael and Sarah could remain in the house, not as owners but as tenants under a formal rental agreement, market rate, rent, a 1-year term, an option to repurchase at fair market value if they demonstrated sustained responsibility. The bank satisfied that the debt had a reliable payer, and that the victim, me, acknowledged knowledge of the arrangements, would consider closing the fraud inquiry without criminal referral. The alternative, I added without heat, was proceeding with a case that would stain more than their finances. Sarah's face blanched at the rent figure. That's higher than our mortgage. That's what the market demands, I said. You are free to find something less expensive but not free to find it here without terms. Michael stood, then sat aside, failing to decide whether it would come in. You're blackmailing us, he said. I smiled with a tiredness that had learned where to place its weight. No, I am drawing a boundary and offering you a door. He stared at the contract as if it might transform under his gaze. It did not. Outside, a delivery truck rattled past, and the sound felt like the world continuing without our permission. Finally, he asked, small as a boy who has finally listened to a rule, what if we cannot pay? Then we will do what adults do, I said. We will part with civility you have not yet earned, and you will find a life scaled to reality. The clock on the mantel ticked like a metronome, while Sarah read every line of the agreement again, her lips moving as if she could alter the terms by whispering them. Michael pressed his fingers to his temples, staring at the ceiling, then at the floor, anywhere but me. Finally, with the air of a man cornered by his own shadow, he asked, and if we sign, you'll tell the bank this was all a misunderstanding? I let the silence stretch until it felt like a wall pressing in. Then I answered with measured calm. If you sign, I will tell the bank that every arrangement was made with my knowledge. I will say I intended to contribute, that I understood the terms. They will accept my testimony because I am the one who was allegedly victimized. But understand this, Michael, respect cannot be notarized. It will have to be earned. His jaw tightened, but his hands trembled as he reached for the pen. Sarah's hand shot out, stopping him. This is insane, she said, her voice breaking. She's your mother, not your landlord. She's supposed to help, not punish. Her eyes darted toward me, brimming with tears she hoped would soften me. Once they might have. Now I saw them as strategies sharpened and wielded like a blade. I leaned forward, my voice gentle but firm. I am your mother, yes, but I am also a woman who refuses to be stolen from. You both mistook kindness for weakness. That mistake ends today. I placed the pen between them. Decide. The decision was less dramatic than the build-up. Michael signed first, his name looping across the page with the stiff resignation of a man carving his own gravestone. Sarah followed, the pen clattering from her hand when she finished. I slipped the contract back into my folder and rose. Congratulations, I said lightly. You are now my tenants. Welcome to accountability. 3 days later, I sat across from Robert at a small downtown bistro, sunlight spilling across the table between us. His expression carried the quiet satisfaction of a man who had seen justice stitched into place. They signed yesterday morning, he told me, sliding a copy of the notarized agreement across the table, filed with the county clerk. You're officially their landlord. I traced the embossed seal with one finger, surprised at the mix of triumph and sorrow. It feels strange, I admitted. Like winning a war you never wanted to fight. Robert studied me for a long moment before reaching across the table and covering my hand with his. Sometimes strength doesn't look like battle. Sometimes it's as simple as drawing a line and refusing to let anyone cross it again. My phone buzzed, interrupting us. Michael's name glowed on the screen. I showed it to Robert, who arched an eyebrow. The text was short, almost pitiful. Mom, I want to make this right. Please let me try. My chest ached with the complicated love that only a parent can feel. Half fury, half yearning. Do you think he means it? I asked. Robert's smile was kind, but cautious. People can change, he said, but sometimes they only change when they've been forced to look in the mirror. The question is, are you willing to open the door even a little? That night I sat with the message glowing on my nightstand until the clock read past midnight. Finally, I typed my reply. Come to my apartment tomorrow at 7 p.m. Alone. We'll talk. The next evening I opened the door to find Michael looking smaller than I remembered. His shoulders slumped, his eyes hollow, his tie knotted poorly as if he had lost the will to present himself. In his hands was a manila envelope he clutched like armor. Hi Mom, he said softly. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat on opposite ends of the couch, the envelope lying between us like a silent third party.